It's time for On Point with Julian Phillips.
Well, could this just be the traditional ebb and flow of politics? One party gets in, and then, of course, when it comes to the next elections, there's a landslide of people moving to the other party. Uh, the election day was just yesterday, and already it seems like the Republicans have taken a number of seats around the country locally. Governorship of New Jersey looks like it's now going back to the Republican. Phil Murphy, the Democrat there, he would have been the second Democrat in 44 years to win re-election in that state. And a bunch of local elections here in New York, the Republicans have just taken things over in a landslide. The Nassau County executive here in Long Island, she's in a fight for her life. She may lose. A bunch of legislative seats have been now taken over by Republicans. Of course, nationally, people were looking at New Jersey, but of course, in the state of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe against Youngkin. Youngkin handily beat Terry McAuliffe. Is this just the regular ebb and flow? Is this the Trump factor? What's going on right now? Is this any different than it normally is when it comes to politics? Well, I'll tell you what, somebody may know, and that's Eric Ham. And he joins us from Washington, D.C., of course, our political pundit, best-selling author, and political analyst. Eric, welcome. I know you've probably been up all night looking at all these returns. Let's start with the state of Virginia. What do you make of this?
You know, there are a lot of people who are going to look at this and say that it will be Democrats' inability to get things done in Washington for President Biden's agenda that sunk Terry McAuliffe. But what we saw here is this, I think this was just an off year election where you simply did not have the Democrats excited, engaged to actually turn out. And at some point, you've got to be able to turn out voters. I don't know if the national politics of what's happened there will play. And we got to remember, Democrats in Virginia and have been dogged with issues. Remember, the governor had some issues surrounding blackface. You had the lieutenant governor who had been accused of sexual assault. And so, all of these things, I think, played into why Democrats simply didn't turn out. Remember, in Virginia, Democrats overwhelmingly have a majority of more voters in the state of Virginia than do Republicans. But what we are seeing, and even what we saw in California with that recall election, you have Republican voters who are just more excited, who are more eager to turn out. And so what Democrats have to do is try to find a reason to turn out their base, to get their base excited. Now, one reason why the base may not be excited is because they do see Democrats at the national level not delivering on the things they want: filibuster reform, voting rights legislation, and delivering on Biden's agenda, which will provide tax credits for children, childcare, free community college, all of these things that are overwhelmingly popular with Democrats. Right now, unfortunately, Democrats are not delivering. And so I think we can look at this almost as a case-by-case basis, because when you look at New Jersey, it is inexplicable that Murphy looks like he may lose there. And I don't know if that has anything necessarily to do with what's going on at the national level, because Murphy got very high marks for how he handled COVID in that state. So I think we're looking at just Democrats who are not excited to turn out, Republicans who are, and Democrats who simply don't have an understanding of what it takes to turn out their base.
All right, well, let's unpack a couple of things here, Eric, and go back quickly. You mentioned something about in the state of Virginia, something about blackface. I think you also mentioned something about sexual assault. These are with the Democrats, correct? Is that correct?
That's right. That is correct.
Okay. So we've got that going on, but we also have a situation down there where there seems to be somewhat of a backlash over parental control over education. And the thing that comes up, as it always comes up in politics, is race. And these white suburban parents not wanting their kids to be taught differently. How much of that is a factor? And also, is Trump a factor in any of this? Because you got to remember now, Youngkin did not want and did not invite Trump to come down and campaign for him. How does the Trump factor work into all of this?
If we look at Virginia specifically, I don't think Trump was a factor at all. In fact, I think it was Terry McAuliffe who tried to make Trump the boogeyman, but it just didn't work. And I think what we saw was you had Republicans who played the culture wars. You're absolutely right. Making this an issue of parents and parental control. And when you're talking about issues of parental control and what kids can read and what kids can do, and parents get involved like that, it does come down to an issue of race, but it becomes an issue of how do you counteract that? And once again, Julian, what we're seeing is Democrats are on their back foot, and they're not at the forefront anticipating what Republicans are going to do, how they're going to use this racial playbook, and they simply aren't ready to combat that. And I think that's what we saw here. And I think you saw Terry McAuliffe, overwhelmingly try to use the Trump factor to scare people, and it just didn't work. Whereas Youngkin using this issue of parental control and education school boards as an issue. And then quite frankly, we have seen this playing out, throughout the course of this year. And now you have states that are now calling for books that cannot be read, books that they believe are not beneficial for students. And this is where this fight is going to be played. It's already being played in school boards across the country. The question now becomes, Democrats, how do you counteract that? Clearly, Republicans have used this issue of critical race theory to their benefit, even though it's not even an issue in public schools. People fail to realize critical race theory is something that is only taught in law school. Law school. It's not even part of the K through 12 curriculum. But
Eric, my point is why even use that name when you come up with critical race theory?
Julian, the name is being used as a foil, as a way to scare people. And when you scare people, you energize them. Republicans have done that very well.
Right. No, I understand that. But, as well as you've explained it to me and as well as I understand it, how come the Democrats just can't come back and say that? This is what I don't understand. You can explain this to the average person and they'll understand.
It's messaging 101. You're right. All Democrats have to do is say critical race theory is not taught in K through 12, never has been taught in K through 12, has never even been a remote issue of being taught in K through 12. It's only taught primarily in law school. And the only way you will actually come across it is if you're in law school. End of story.
Okay. Look, we have always agreed on one thing. We agree on a lot of things, but we agree on one thing. The Democrats just don't know how to fight. They need some communications people. They need to pay us to come down there and to do their communications because it seems to be a very simple message that they just never seem to get out. Look, here's the deal. Focusing on elections around the country, specifically here in New York where I live, where Republicans have taken a number of seats back. The question is, in my mind, Eric Ham, are any of these folks that are energized because they felt that the election was a fraud, that they are Trump people, or are we seeing Republicans maybe trying to take the party back from Trump? Just in case with Youngkin, he did not want Trump coming down there to help campaign for him, like the Democrats had Obama come down there. They had Kamala Harris come down there. Of course, Joe Biden come down. Are we seeing the Republicans now trying to say, hey, maybe look, we're going to shift from Trump. There's been some talk that McConnell is trying to shift away from Trump. Could this possibly be, and we're just seeing the Republican Party trying to take the reins away from Trump? What are we looking at here?
Well, when you bring in Mitch McConnell, McConnell has been trying to distance himself from Trump since Trump lost the election, and more importantly, lost him, the Senate majority leader. So he's been trying to distance himself from Trump for quite some time. As far as Youngkin is concerned, we have to remember Virginia is now a blue state. It's no longer purple. It's no longer red. It's blue. And so what you saw in Youngkin was actually a blueprint on how you compete in a blue state as a Republican. And so that's what worked for him. Also, and I think we have to be frank here, Terry McAuliffe just didn't run a good campaign. It was a lazy campaign in the sense that basically he just said, I'll just come in here, scare people, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is nowhere to be seen. Donald Trump is nowhere to be found in a blue state that is run by Democrats at every level of government. And so it just simply did not work. Youngkin actually came in and actually put issues and items on the table. He made this a culture war fight. And that is what actually excited the base of the Republican Party and got them to come out.
I want to close with this, your perspectives on this. How will these elections now affect the midterms? How will this affect, say, Joe Biden's ability or inability to pass these infrastructure bills? What does this bode for the Democrats down the road? Are they the walking dead, the walking wounded? Can they recover from this? What are your thoughts?
I think if we look at elections and say this portends what is going to happen to Democrats a year from now, I think that might be a bridge too far, because I do believe you have to look at each election on its own merit to determine what happened in that particular state. For example, how Terry McAuliffe ran his race, I think plays in how Terry McAuliffe lost his race. Next year, going into the midterm elections, I think what we saw today might be a wake-up call for Democrats, only in the sense that Democrats have to be on the offensive at all times on messaging. Look, we know that Republicans are always working behind the scenes to come up with something. And Democrats have to get ahead of the game as opposed to falling behind and then playing catch up. That's what we see from Democrats all the time. And that's why they always fall behind. And that's why they struggle to try to figure out what to do next. And so no matter what the policies are, and also oftentimes Democrats just believe that the policy is good and we don't have to do any messaging around it. But that's not always the case. You have to always be engaged, always be trying to work your message and make sure you are ahead of the game. For example, next year, we know that at least 3 states are up that could actually extend the lead of Senate Democrats in the Senate right now, because there are states who have Democrats running where Joe Biden won in 2020. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin immediately come to mind. In addition to that, we know that there is an African-American woman who's running for the Senate in North Carolina who narrowly lost a statewide a judge seat there. But also we know that the courts ruled recently that 1.4 million voters who were illegally removed from the voting rolls in North Carolina have now been mandated to be put back on. So that's a state where Democrats actually could do well, in addition to Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. So Democrats could do well, but again, it comes down to messaging. Jamie Harrison, who is now head of the DNC, he's got to figure out a way to be thinking ahead and thinking, how do we speak with one voice as a party, but also speaking to the needs and concerns of everyday Americans. Right now, we're just not seeing that from Democrats.
Yeah, I know this seems rather elementary to me, my friend, but what do I know? Look, very interesting. We'll see how this goes. Again, some of this ebb and flow, but a lot of it, I think, as you said, is messaging, not being able to put a correct message out there that people can sink their teeth into. And of course, as you said, specifically with the state of Virginia, unfortunately, there's some baggage there. Some folks can get away with baggage, as we know, and other folks simply cannot. Let's see how all this plays out. But very interesting, Eric. And we still have this other tempest in a teapot. At least, well, we've got two, but one more than the other, and that's Joe Manchin. But we'll talk about that later as all this stuff unfolds with infrastructure. Because you mentioned something to me the other day that made a whole lot of sense. But we'll leave that for another day. As always, my friend, thank you much.
You bet. Thanks, buddy.
So here we go with another cycle of elections. And, nowadays things are a little bit different because elections are so unpredictable. And as Eric says, you necessarily can't bank on the results of one election to determine the future of those that are coming right after. We'll just have to see. There's so much stuff going on. There's so much drama going on. But outside of that, on a very serious note, there's a lot of stuff that's at stake for us as Americans. Of course, race is an issue. The economy is an issue. Climate change is an issue for all of us. And we are hoping and believing that we will get the correct messaging or the truth from both parties. So we as Americans can not only be engaged in the process, energized by the process of what we call democracy, but making sure that democracy as we know it survives. We're going to keep our eye on this on Point. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.